Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Trailblazers podcast. We're your hosts, Dave and Tyler. And today we're going to do a short clip on how you can succeed in a behavioral interview and some strategies and the format you can think about and kind of our general tips and tricks on how you can make yourself stand out more. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of go over the format of kind of what the interview would look like and kind of the structure. So Dave, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit more about that and what they can expect in the interview?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Tyler. So, in regards to the interview, the first thing that you're going to be thinking about is when you get yourself into behavioral interview, most likely one of the first questions you're going to face every single time is the interviewer asking you about an introduction. So, with the introduction piece, typically how this works is they're most likely actually wanting to hear a little bit about probably what are you studying or what have you studied, what your work experience is or internship experience, and then maybe say some of your outcome from that particular experience. So what this looks like for us is we want to focus on an elevator pitch. And usually an elevator pitch is like 30 to 45 seconds. That's like a high level overview of your experience to this point and say some of the things that you've been working on. And you can practice this with your friends or your family too, but you really just want to try to be succinct, talk about what you did for your education, maybe some work experience that you have, and then say like what you're really looking forward to, say, doing or contributing in this team in the future. And then the next thing that you want to kind of think about is probably some of the more behavioral type of questions that you'll face. And for this, I'll throw it back to Tyler. And Tyler, you can explain a little bit more about the behavioral portion of the interview.
Yeah, so for the behavioral portion, they're going to try to elicit your personality traits and how you would react to certain situations that may arise in the workplace. And a lot of times, this isn't going to be the most ideal, perfect conditions. They're going to try to understand what type of employee and team player you're going to be when things don't necessarily go right, or there's conflict in the workplace, or the company goes through a tough time, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're going to be looking for examples of when you've done this in the past, how you've reacted, and kind of the results that were produced from that. And so then you have to have some examples ready to go for that. And you can't get really caught unprepared for these questions because these are pretty standard. Every interviewer at every company is going to ask some form of these questions. And you need to have a number of examples kind of ready to go for that.
Yeah, exactly. And so pretty much like what Tyler's saying is like these examples, how you can prep those in advance is maybe have like a spreadsheet or a document where you can take like 5 to 10 different types of examples. Because what actually happens is when you're answering these form or these questions, you're typically going to use a like a response format in the way that you're going to answer the question. So a very classic one is called a STAR, which is basically a situation, a task, an action, and then the result. And so what ends up happening is these examples that you're already thinking about, what you want to do is you want to use these as your situation. So what's going to happen is you'll have different questions that'll be asked by different interviewers in every different type of interview. But then you can rely on these specific examples that you've memorized to work with the S portion. So then once you're going into the task, then basically you might have to modify a little bit, but because you probably have these things already memorized quite well, you'll be able to like hear the interviewer asking that question and have a good idea of the example that you want to utilize at that point in time. So when you're, say, moving through that, then you can move into the other sections. And then Tyler, do you actually want to talk about maybe like how you can use STAR to say like give the best outcome of like the question that you've been asked at that point?
Yeah, for sure, Dave. So I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head is that you want to use, one example or a handful of examples for a multitude of different questions that can be asked for you. Because if you think about these particular examples, oftentimes many things happen. So if they want you to say, tell us a time when you face some adversity on a project, when there was like a slowdown or things didn't go your way, how did you handle it? Or if they say, how did you handle conflict in the workplace at some point? Oftentimes this exact same example that you have can be used for both of them because everything's going to happen at once usually, or that's why you have a couple that you can draw on. So you don't have to spend all day thinking about 100 different examples before you go into the interview. You just need to know a couple of them really well, and you can use them, like Dave says, to modify it a little bit. And so what you want to do is really think about, set the circumstances of what happened, why was it a problem, how you approached it, how the team approached it, the action you took, the role that you played, and then what was the result of that? Was it, a success at the end? Was it a failure with lessons learned and everything? And so what they're going to try to look for is, there's a couple good characteristics that are always looked for here. Is that's kind of like lack of ego, right? So what raises a red flag sometimes in interviews is if you come in and you give this example about how everything went wrong and you saved the day and you're the best and everything like that. That's kind of, a little bit of a red flag. I think people more so want to hear about in these interviews is how you worked well with a team, how you worked through a problem. If you recognized one of your own faults and you kind of addressed that and you moved like forward from it, having some humility, working good with others, things of that nature. So those are the type of examples that they look for in it. And if you want to, yeah, say it in a structured way like that, really set the circumstances of what happened. What was your role on the team? What was the action taken? What did you learn from it? And how did you move forward? How did you become a better employee, team member, better person, everything like that? Is there anything you'd add to that, Dave?
Yeah, for sure. I think actually, so really good advice. And then a couple things that I'm thinking about in my head too is just kind of like high level tips. You get often asked, what is my weakness? Or a question that basically is asking about a star, like a behavioral like question, but asking about you identifying a weakness. This is a perfect type of question that you can actually prepare for in advance and make sure you have like an honest and like very like, be like have like humility with your answer essentially because like the types of interviews that you might go into and say like the person says, oh, I don't have any weaknesses, I don't have anything that's wrong. It's actually kind of like a lack of self-awareness because you don't really know where your blind spots are. So
Yeah.
actually, like interviewers really appreciate if you have humility when you're answering this question. So just prepare that in advance. And one more thing I want to point out too is oftentimes in behavioral interviews, we have this tendency, if we're very team folks, we have this tendency to always use we when we're answering, especially for the action portion of the star format. We is okay and it's good, but try to also focus some of the like answers on like your core actions and like what you did to solve or fix the problem. And sometimes your interviewer will actually notice that you're saying we over and over again, and they'll be like, okay, sounds great, but do you mind clarifying if it was you or the team? Or so think about that a little bit too. And I think, yeah, that's probably most of my tips for now on succeeding in behavioral interviews. I think, probably the last one I would point out is just doing some prep work on the company before you're going into the interview. It really doesn't need to be too much. I think you can probably spend 5 to 15 minutes basically prepping like maybe a Word document or some type of document over the company. And maybe you can read through one of their articles. I found that to be quite helpful. Maybe if a company has like some research or a cool project that you're curious on, if you know about that and then you can talk about that in your interview, I think it shows really well versus say, if you hop into an interview and you know absolutely nothing about the company, they'll pick that up because you might not have the same enthusiasm that they're looking for about the company or the mission that it's going for. Tyler, any kind of final thoughts on this?
Yeah, just one final thought, just in terms of prep work on the company, something that's worked really well for myself, and I don't hear like I don't know a lot of other people that do it, but I think it's something that's particularly valuable is if you actually like look up the mission statement and the core values of the company beforehand. And this is kind of hard to find. This may not always be like on their website. It might kind of be in some corporate document or something like that. And if you can show in your behavioral questions, or if you can literally tell it to the interviewers what the mission statement of the company is and how your core values tie to that. I think that's something really valuable for them because you got to kind of show like what is your motivation for being at that company too in the interview. And if you're the core values is really the innermost layer of the company and their mission statement and what they're trying to achieve. So if you're drawn to that, no matter which way the company pivots in the future, what they grow into, if they still hold on to that same mission statement and core values, you're always going to be a valuable employee because that's what you believe in. If you're there just because you like to work on a certain type of technology or you're interested in some like fringe element of the company, if they change one day, they might lose you as an employee, but they'll know they'll always have you if you're aligned with their own goals. And it also another thing is that like a lot of the employees at the company, I find out a lot of companies don't know their own mission statement. Like if you were to ask an employee at a company, they wouldn't know kind of what that is a lot of times. So it's like if you can memorize that, it shows that you've done your homework on the company. So like that preparation work is also like a sign of respect and effort that you've put into that you actually want this position. You know that you as a person, employee, you would tie really well into that company and their values. So I would say put some effort into figuring out why the company is doing what they're doing, and understanding why you would also be a good fit for that and why you align with that. I think that can make a big impact in the interview as well. But other than that, I think that about covers it. If you guys do all those things, I think you will, succeed in behavioral interviews. Anything else, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys are, doing any and all of these tips and advices, you would definitely be doing extremely well in your interviews. And also, one more thing is, if you have any other tips or advice that you want to share, please share it in the comments below. And so, like, anybody else looking at this video in the future can go and see, and then discover, some of the other things that they can do to improve their interview performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Catch you next time, guys.
All right, peace.